Hi everyone, I'm Liz Medvedow, Executive Director of the Rappaport Center for Law and Public Policy at BC Law School. On behalf of Dan Kenstrom, our Faculty Director, and Abby Chingo, our Administrative Assistant over there, welcome to today's recorded program, The People's Lawyer, the Impact of State Attorneys General. We'd like to thank the American Constitution Society of BC Law, and especially Trevor Fry, who originally brought this program to the Rappaport Center, as well as the BC Law Democrats and the BC Law Republicans for co-sponsoring. For those of you who don't know us, the Rappaport Center, we convene leaders of public policy and law to delve into critical issues affecting individuals and communities, focusing on state and local levels, including but not limited to criminal justice, housing, immigration, civil rights, racial equity, and education. We also bring public sector luminaries to campus, case in point, to serve not only as program participants, but as Rappaport Distinguished Visiting Professors and Rappaport Senior Fellows. On October 19th, we're welcoming journalist lawyer Kimberly Atkins Storr, columnist at the Boston Globe, as a Rappaport Senior Fellow. She'll be giving a community address about facial recognition bias. And 2 days later, with Kim as moderator, we're holding a full program on facial recognition with panelists from the ACLU, law enforcement, and our now very own former Associate Justice of the SJC, Elspeth Cipher. A week later, on February 28th, we're holding a powerful program on domestic violence, laws, and policies, with equally stellar panelists, including the policy director from Jane Doe, the managing attorney of the Family Law Unit at Greater Boston Legal Services, and a 2021 Rappaport Fellow, a new lawyer, whose journey as a domestic violence survivor and ideas to improve domestic violence laws will inspire us all. Now, back to today's amazing program. Promoting public service and inspiring law students to enter the public sector is the guidepost that Jerry and Phyllis Rappaport established more than 20 years ago when they created the Rappaport Center. An attorney general is the consummate public servant. The AG's office in every state has tremendous breadth and depth. Here in the Commonwealth, as well as Vermont, the AG is one of just 6 constitutional officers and one of 5 in Rhode Island. AGs serve as chief law enforcement officers. The People's Law Office works to protect and defend us proactively and reactively in criminal and civil matters, in issues ranging from gun control to housing discrimination, to workers' rights, to reproductive justice, to consumer protection, and so much more. And AG wields enormous power to make our states safer, cleaner, more equitable, with community and individual rights as foundational principles of justice. I consider myself one of the privileged lawyers in the Commonwealth because I spent 10 years of my now nearly 40-year career as a lawyer in the Massachusetts Attorney General's office. My colleagues there were among the hardest working, smartest, most thoughtful, and really fun individuals I have ever met. The work was exciting, intellectually stimulating, and meaningful. The office truly has the power to change lives. For all of the law students here in person and those of you watching on Zoom, I highly encourage you to consider working in an AG's office. And I happen to know that all 3 of these AGs hired people right out of law school. We are honored today to have 3 current attorneys general. Why that's the plural, maybe one of you will answer. And a former AG serving as moderator. Thank you, Attorneys General Andrea, Campbell Charity Clark, a BC Law alum, and Peter Neronha of Rhode Island, a BC Law alum, for being here. We have never had so many people register for an event before. I'm leaving the privilege of introducing our esteemed AGs to our moderator, but I have the pleasure of introducing him. Jim Tierney was the Attorney General of Maine from 1980 to 1990. During that time, he was actively engaged with the National Association of Attorneys General. He's the founder of stateag.org, and he's been teaching courses on the role of state attorneys general at Columbia Law School, where he directed the clinic, at Harvard Law School, I believe at Yale, and other schools for nearly 25 years. His expertise is sought after by newly elected state attorneys general on how to effectively run their office, and he consults on myriad issues, including structural, legal, and ethical. Jim received his JD from the University of Maine in Portland and his undergrad degree from the University of Maine in Orono. Thank you, Jim, for agreeing instantly, I might add, when I called, to moderate this panel. We are truly honored to have all four of you here.
Thanks, Nancy. First I want to give a little shout out to the Rappaport Center, but also Boston College Law School, which has long been, both institutions, a deep advocate for governmental public service. You know, government can take a lot of hits out there in the world, but this school has always understood that if we don't have a strong government, what is it that we've got, right? And so it's generated an entire commitment to attorneys general. And indeed, the grandfather of the first modern attorney general was Francis X. Bellotti. He graduated from this school in 1952. That is correct. That is 72 years ago.
He's 100 years old.
He's 100 years old, and he continues to give speeches and to advise us, certainly to me. We've had other BC graduates become Attorney General here in Massachusetts. Tom Riley is the Attorney General, and we have two graduates, both Peter Neronha and Charity Clark, who are graduates of this school. So any of you could be the Attorney General, and any of you could go out there and roll up your sleeves and do the kind of job that this country so desperately needs right now. All right, that's my pitch. Here's how it's going to work. I'm going to ask each of the AGs to come up and give 5 or 6 minute talk about how they believe they have impacted their state and their region and the country. And then we're going to sit and we're going to have a moderated discussion back and forth among them, and I think you'll find it interesting. AGs are not shy. They're not afraid to talk, so I hope to not be doing a lot of moderating here except to throw a question once in a while. We are recorded, so for those of you who are worried about whether you'll be confirmed for judgeship at some time in the future, absolutely every word you say will be recorded and cross-examined by the United States Senate at the appropriate time. So my point is, it is a recorded event. It will live forever on the internet, and so you should keep that in mind as you speak later. So if we're good, our first speaker is the Attorney General of Vermont, Charity Clark. Charity spent 10 years in the AG's office coming up out of the Public Protection Division. She grew up in a small town in Vermont, Manchester, Vermont, which is actually much closer to Albany, New York than it is to Montpelier. But she had a good sense of where she lived and where she wanted to be. And like our own General Campbell, she spent time advising her governor, Howard Dean, in Vermont, moved into the AG's office where she's had an extraordinary career, and this is her first term. And I don't know about you, I am really looking forward to hearing what she has to say. Charlie, you're up. Would you rather? Sure, let's sit down.
Yeah, okay. So a funny story, can you hear me?
I think it's on there.
Okay, there we go. Funny story. I am a 10th generation Vermonter on my mother's side of the family, and a 10th generation Vermonter on my father's side of the family. And when I moved to Newton to go to this fine institution, my friend called me and he was like, I can't believe you went to Boston to go to school. And I know your ancestors would be haunting you, but they don't want to go to Massachusetts to do it. So I was ghost-free in my 3 years at Boston College Law School. So as Jim said, I grew up in southern Vermont, and I spent a lot of time working in my family's grocery store. I can't believe I'm doing this again, but I am the daughter, granddaughter, and great-granddaughter of small town Vermont grocers. And I spent a lot of time stocking shelves and working in the checkout and stocking, slicing the bologna and all of it. And of course, that made a huge impression on me because in a small town, the supermarket is the center of the community, and I saw it all. I saw, the kids who were hanging on their moms, and the widowers, and the skiers coming up to enjoy a weekend. And I really saw all humanity there in the grocery store. And so not surprisingly, I kind of took that with me when I grew up. I went to the University of Vermont for my undergraduate years. Then I was just drawn to especially state politics and found my way to the governor's office. And eventually here, you're so lucky to be students at this school because this school values public service. I remember when I was trying to decide where to go, it was 2002, and I realized, especially after I graduated, that this was a school where I was going to learn the values that I wanted to bring to my practice as an attorney, and how lucky I was to not only, be in an environment where that was nurtured, but also to make friends with people who shared those values. And I graduated in 2005, which doesn't seem that long ago to me, but definitely was a long time ago. When I ran for office on the weekend before the election day in November, 2 of my classmates flew to Vermont to help me. Imagine, that's amazing. One of them brought their daughter, who was 9 years old, totally dazzled by meeting all these politicians. So it's really so thrilling to be here. I had trust in the states in this very room. It looked just the same, except the Wi-Fi required a cartridge that you stuck into your laptop, and they were like, "We have Wi-Fi." It was such a great thing. So I don't want to go on, and we've already heard so much about what it means to be an attorney general. I don't know that I knew that much about what the attorney general did when I was a student here. And I'm so grateful that I made my way to the office, because what I learned is how incredibly powerful attorneys general are. And I especially saw that in 2016 or 2017, early when President Trump was put into office, and the attorneys general who did not agree with some of his policies kind of clicked into action. And I hope we never have to do that again. But if we do, we'll be ready. And it's nice to know we've had practice, because we're gonna do really well again if we have to. We have a lot of power protecting people and protecting systems like election systems, commerce, and of course criminal systems. A lot of the attorneys general do criminal work. And we bring in a lot of money for the state thanks to the tobacco settlement of 1998 and other settlements that we have done against opioid manufacturers. And Andrea and Peter and I know each other because a lot of like-minded states team up. And sometimes the like-minded states are every state, because the issue is so universal, like tobacco, recent other cases that we have brought together. So I won't go on and on. I can't wait to talk more about all of these issues that are so important, but wanted to reflect a little bit about my experience being a student here, and say how I'm sure when you're studying contracts or whatever you're studying, you're thinking, oh my God, what have I done? I want you to know you did the right thing, and you're going to be great lawyers, and you're going to look back on these years with fondness, I promise.
Wow, thank you. I want to give an additional shout out to BC Law. You actually have an Attorney General course and program here and clinic run by Professor Barnico, and the only reason he's not here with us is because he is in the Massachusetts AG's office mentoring BC students right now. But he's terrific, so if you are interested, you do have an academic option here at Boston College. On my website I have something called AG 101, which is like AG's for dummies, right? And it's my little mini TED Talk, so if you want to, also if you're just interested more generally about the Office of Attorney General, that is another option for you. Our second speaker is another BC grad, Peter Neronha. Peter's the Attorney General of Rhode Island. And Rhode Island is unique in that there are no district attorneys in Rhode Island, so they have an immense criminal jurisdiction. Peter came up as a special assistant attorney general. He was appointed by President Obama to be the United States attorney on the federal side. During those terms of office, he came back. He has run for attorney general with his criminal background. He's dramatically expanded the civil side of his office as well. They do a lot of healthcare litigation. They do antitrust regulation. They do civil rights regulations. And it's an honor to introduce Peter Neronha.
Thanks, Jim. There must be something about this room, because I had trust in this state. There was no Wi-Fi. There was Professor Slazewski, who peers off one of these walls here somewhere. And what a great professor he is, but we all have those stress dreams, and mine is that I have taken Professor Slazewski's class as a 3L, and he is failing me. And I'm not going to graduate. And that is my stress dream, however many years, 30 years, post Boston College Law School. When I sit here, or in places like this, I often try to imagine what it's like to be sitting out there. And when you're sitting out there, you don't think that however old you are, 25 or 21 or 29, that you'll ever be sitting up here. And I will tell you that through most of my career, no one thought, there was probably nobody less likely to be a U.S. attorney in the Obama administration or the Attorney General than me. I was a registered independent to the day that Jack Reed and Sheldon Whitehouse recommended me to the president. I've been an assistant U.S. attorney as well as an assistant AG. I've worked at Goodwin here in Boston for 7 years. I viewed myself as a career prosecutor by then, and I would have stayed as an AUSA in the Rhode Island office until I retired. I was appointed U.S. attorney, and then President Trump fired me, and I had to reinvent myself. And rather than reinvent myself as another large, big law person, I said, no, I'm not doing that. Having done it once, and so I ran for AG and I won. But I'll tell you, all my road to this seat, those seats, is really, really unlikely. And I guess that's just my way of saying to you that if you are interested in public service, you will never regret doing it. I never have. And I've had more fun trying cases in state and federal court. Being U.S. attorney was great, in large part because we were part of a larger team around the country, all reading from the same sheet of music in the Obama administration. And then as Attorney General, really two things. The value of colleagues, like the two sitting to my left and to my right, really makes the job so much more fun. But I will say that where I have found opportunity as Attorney General has been expanding the mission of the office. If you take the approach when you're Attorney General that your powers in the civil side in particular are as broad as you decide to make them to be, what you realize is you can't get to every issue that you want to address. There are so many issues for us to address as attorneys general. I have this criminal responsibility as the only felony prosecutor in my state, and so we're trying cases all the time in ways that you cannot try cases anywhere else. And yet, if you decide after 4 or 5 years that you don't want to try murder cases any longer, or sexual assaults against children, as 70 of our prosecutors are doing, you want to do appellate work, or you want to go do healthcare, or you want to do environmental work, or you want to do consumer protection work, or you want to do civil defensive litigation, all of that is available to you in that one 250-person organization. What I was really struck by when I came back was how many of my former colleagues were still there. I left in 2002 to be an assistant U.S. attorney. When I came back in 2018, a lot of my former colleagues were there. I'll just try to capture the impact of the work before we get into our discussion with one thing. There are now 1,300 children in Rhode Island that are lead poisoned every year. 1,300 children. And that is a problem. Lead paint poisoning, any home that was built before 1978, which probably means all of them in Newton from my memory, has lead paint in it. And, children, mostly poor children, mostly black and brown children, grow up in homes where they are the tenant and where landlords simply don't clean up the lead paint in their homes. And so when I became Attorney General, the Department of Health had been issuing violations, notices of violation. Every child has their blood tested between the ages of 1 month and 3 years old, and those blood test results go to the Department of Health, and so they know that the child's been lead poisoned, and they know how they've been lead poisoned, and so they'll send an inspector out to confirm that there's lead paint in the home, and they'll issue notices of violation to the landlords to clean up those properties. And the landlords had been blowing off the Department of Health for some of them for as much as a decade. And so our office, and it did not come from me, it came out of the organic, how do we use our power to help people spirit that exists in our civil division that we were going to build a lead paint program. And we have done, by now, I think we have brought 20 to 30 lawsuits, some against some of the biggest landlords in the state, to require them to clean up those properties, to put parents and their children in temporary housing during the week that at the landlord's expense, obviously, during the week that those landlords clean up those properties. We have sponsored and got passed legislation which the governor needs to fund, and I'm going to hound him until he does, a registry where every landlord has to file a certificate of lead compliance across the state. So now parents are confident when they rent an apartment that it is lead free. That is a relatively small part of what we do, but every day we do it, I think of the 1,300 or more children in Rhode Island that are lead poisoned every year. If you want to be a healthcare regulator, that opportunity exists. Andrea, I'm sure you're dealing with Steward. We're dealing with a company called Prospect, where private equity has sucked all of the value out of hospital systems and is forcing community hospitals to close because they simply can't make it anymore. It is a critical responsibility of attorneys general to step in when that happens. So the breadth of the work is amazing. We have an honors program for graduating law students. I made 2 offers to BC grads recently. They both decided not to come. If they're in this room, I will find you. I will hound you like I hound the governor. You will have no better experience than working for a year in our office. You can literally choose criminal or civil. You can choose where you'll spend your time. You can change it once you get there. And we just hired a young lawyer from Yale. Okay, is it Yale where Paul went? Who was in our honors program, a Yale law graduate, Harvard undergrad, and he just decided to stay with us yesterday. So I recommend that to you, Kate. And we're dressed in green, yellow coat, so she can be easily spotted, can talk to you if you're interested about that. So would I. So great to be here again.
Well, if you haven't already been inspired to go to Vermont and Rhode Island, you now have the great opportunity to hear our own Attorney General from the Commonwealth, Andrea Campbell, who is serving her first term. Andrea grew up in Roxbury. She had an extremely rough time of it, but she has obviously gone on. She went to Princeton. She went to UCLA Law School for some reason, not only leaving New England, but really leaving all of us behind. But she's come home. She's worked for counsel for Governor Patrick. She has worked in a whole variety of public service, legal services sorts of positions here in the Commonwealth. And I could go on a long time with it, but you're not here to listen to me. You're here to listen to your Attorney General of the Commonwealth, Andrea Campbell.
First, thank you to the law school and thank you to the Rappaport Center for hosting us. It's great to be on this panel with Tierney and Peter. We do work closely together on a whole host of things. I did not go to BC Law. Yeah, I had to go to BC Law. But my first assistant, Pat, who's standing over there, does, and he's also on the advisory board for the Rappaport Center, so I wanted to acknowledge him along with all the team members who are here. So if you have any questions about just the office, hiring, whatever it is, don't hesitate to reach out to my team members who are standing along the wall. I just have to say this, and I think my colleagues would echo this. I love my job. I love my job. Even on the tough days, and Peter brought up Stewart and all the things that are in the news right now that we're dealing with, and major issues, not just within Massachusetts, but in the region, and of course nationally. We're following everything related to the 2024 election, the rule of law, the protection of the rule of law, the protection of our democratic institutions in this country. Even on those days that are really tough and you don't know what the future holds, I get to go into an office to work with incredible lawyers and staff who are passionate public servants, who are overworked and underpaid. We're at the State House every day fighting not just for a comparable salary for our attorneys in particular, compared to what folks make at other state agencies or DA offices, but for a respectable salary, and that is ongoing work. But they work really hard. And they care deeply about not only doing the work with a sense of urgency, empathy, and compassion, but also a standard of excellence, which is really important. And I think as folks are becoming more distrustful of government, it is really important that we not only get out to talk about the work we do, but to stress that AGs are doing it with that level of integrity and exceptionalism. And frankly, are probably the most, I think, maybe the most relevant office right now when you think about the issues we're grappling with as a country. And so it's just a delight to go into office every single day. We have offices not only in Boston, but also in New Bedford, Springfield, and Worcester. I have to lift up our regional offices that often feel left out and left behind. They do incredible work there. And also, I carry the role and responsibility with a deep sense of gratitude and humility, because my path to get here was definitely not straight. I sit here with all of my biological parents being deceased. My grandparents are deceased. I have loved ones who are currently incarcerated as I sit here. And I talk about how the criminal legal system, the prison system, very much was entangled with my life from the very beginning. My mom actually died in a car accident going to visit my father, who was incarcerated at the time. When my twin brother and I were only 8 months old, she died. And then fast forward, my father actually would be incarcerated for the period of time for the early part of my childhood. I didn't meet him until I was 8 because he was incarcerated. He'd get out of prison and then he would suddenly die when I was a sophomore at Princeton. I talked to my dad one morning. He died the same evening when I was only 19 years old. And then fast forward, the tragedy wouldn't stop there. My twin brother, Andrea, would die while in custody of the Department of Correction, which oversees our prisons here in Massachusetts, when he was 29 years old as a pretrial detainee as a result of receiving inadequate health care. I stress all that to say I have been telling the team that at least under my administration, we will not only, of course, fight for our residents all across the Commonwealth, but I think with a real focus on folks that have ever felt left out or left behind. That doesn't just include our BIPOC communities, folks in our LGBTQ communities, but it also includes folks who are elders, folks who live in our rural communities, and yes, we have poor rural communities in Massachusetts, and we have many of them, but folks who just ever felt like the system slighted them, didn't give them the time of day, felt invisible. There is a real focus that we're tackling there. And the impact we can have is great. I know we'll get to the questions, and I want to make sure that we do. But it is great on every issue you can imagine. The law enforcement work, the criminal work in our Crim Bureau is significant. That's probably what most people know the office for. But the civil side and the policy side are equally significant. And as we get ready to roll out our strategic plan, which we were sort of in the weeds on in year one, we really had to think about what are the tools in our office. I think folks, the AGs have a ton of tools. Great, what are they? And particularly for the lay person to understand. So we have our litigation tools, which are significant, but our policy and government tools are critical. We go into the State House advocating for legislative changes, calling our governors and everyone else to change policy to help us move our ideas forward. We also have our community engagement outreach tool, which is folks going out to give information, to train folks, to work in partnership with stakeholders. And then lastly, our grant-making tool, which is significant. Millions of dollars at our discretion to put out in various forms of grants to help people. And I'll just give you one example before I turn it over to Jim, or back to Jim. We're focused on not only well-being of youth and children, as well as everything related to access to health care and economics. But one of the things that we did early on through our grant-making tool is to focus on maternal health and the disparities that still exist there. The fact that you can be a black birthing person in Massachusetts, the greatest, I think, healthcare system in the world, and be 2 times likely to die from complications giving birth is just astounding to me. So we put out a grant of $1.5 million to community-based organizations all across the state, as far as Berkshire County, that had a track record of doing something innovative to close that gap, in addition to all the other tools. And already those community-based organizations are thriving, and we will measure that success and look at ways in which they use those resources to close the gap. but this is how creative we can be in the work. So this is why I love my job, because we can do whatever the hell we want. Even if we didn't go to BC Law, it's amazing. And so we look forward to, I know the conversation I do as well. And we do hire. We hire folks fresh out of law school. We have a fellowship program we just expanded. And we have some incredible candidates. And I thanked every single one of them for applying, because they were turning down jobs where they were going to make a lot more money. But we told them they would be empowered to work on amazing things. The skill development would be real and intensive, and hopefully it would set them on a path either for public service or anything they dreamed of for themselves. So thank you all for having me. Happy to be here. Thank you.
You should have picked up already the idea that attorneys general are independent forces. So state governments have rejected the federal model, as Peter alluded to, where the United States Attorney General can be removed by the President. Attorneys General are independent. They make their own decisions. They exercise their own independent judgment, and which is what makes them as inspiring as what you're hearing today, and what makes them such a wonderful place to work. So I'm going to kick off the first question, and it's something all three of you engaged in litigation against Meta. And we're talking to a generation which has never lived without the internet. And so my first question is, why did you do it? Anyone? Who wants to start?
I'll start, since we started that way. I'll start this way. I think all of us would agree that we're focused on the well-being of our youth, and there is a mental health epidemic, not just in Massachusetts, but in this country right now. The reports and complaints we continue to get from school providers, school administrators, parents, guardians, caregivers, you name it, youth-based organizations, about the uptake of anxiety, depression, even suicide amongst our young people is really tragic and sad. And this is across every demographic you can think of. And so we said we didn't want to just talk about it, we wanted to do something of significance. And one way of doing that is looking at our litigation tool and taking on social media companies that we know have a direct impact on the well-being of our kids. I'm an AG. I'm also a mother of two young boys. I have a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old. God bless them, and my husband. They're not exposed yet to social media as some of my other colleagues' children are, but the stories that we hear are painful and challenging. I'm sure folks in this room, if we were to go around, would talk about the pros and the cons of these platforms. And so this bipartisan effort is fantastic in that it's Democrats and AGs working together, which is rare, frankly, right now, and looking to hold these social media companies accountable. And I'll just say, before I turn over to my colleagues, I think the reason why we do it is clear. But the thing I think that's frustrated me the most as we continue to engage with Meta and to watch folks, frankly, put profit over the well-being of our kids is this idea that you put sort of the onus on the user, the young person, the parent, to solve the downfalls or the pitfalls of the platform. You can't change the algorithm that will tell you, will design, or sort of, that will send you the content you don't want to see. You can't change the platform itself, so it's not constantly sending you a ton of notifications, almost like a gambling slot machine, making you more addictive. They designed it in a certain way using brain research, not of adults, but of kids, to design a product, to sell it to you, and then to lie about how it's actually going to affect you. And so we're taking on that deception and unfair practices, and I'm excited to do with my colleagues here.
Peter, Jerry?
Thank you.
Yeah, I think Andrea really described why we do it really well. I think when I think about that work, it's consumer protection work at probably at its highest level. And so what I found when I took over as Attorney General was, in my office, we had no lawyers doing consumer protection. We had 2 or 3 investigators who would handle things like, my appliance doesn't work and the company won't call me back, or, my gift card expired and they won't pay me for it. Important work to Rhode Islanders, I will tell you. I send a letter to every Rhode Islander who our consumer team helps, and you wouldn't believe the small dollar amounts that really matter to everyday people. And sometimes it's important to remember that point. And then today we have 4 lawyers doing consumer protection. And they're doing things like going after people who sell solar power to consumers and rip them off and make promises about the refund that they're going to get, the tax credit they're going to get. And whether it's that, or car dealers, or building contractors, you can't underestimate the impact that the lack of an enforcement mechanism to do that work, how that harms everyday people. We had to change our consumer protection statute. Kate led that change so that we could actually do this work. I remember talking to Maura when we were to get Maura Healy when she was the AG, now governor, about our consumer protection statute. And the Attorney General couldn't do any kind of consumer protection work where another federal or state agency had regulatory authority. So when you think about that, that's everything from banking to healthcare to car dealers to people who sell solar. So getting that legislative change, I think without the lobbyists for those industries knowing what we were doing, kudos to Kate, has now, they said, now you're singling out, so-and-so. Well, we couldn't do it at all 4 years ago. So there's that level of work. But then you take the next step up, which is the work on Meta that we are participating in. But we're doing antitrust work, healthcare antitrust. We are one of 2 regulators in the state that has to approve any kind of merger among healthcare entities or changes of ownership beyond a certain amount. We have to approve those transactions, and so we have to have antitrust expertise. So we really weren't flexing there at all, and so. That's how I view some of that work that we do with our colleagues. Some of it is really consumer protection work. It has to be done at a national level. I do think that one place where, and I think the public is asking this question, why, for example, opioid, I was on a radio interview this morning, why aren't opioid executives being held criminally culpable for their conduct? And the answer is that most AG's offices don't have the ability to bring that kind of case. I don't. I don't think I had it when I was U.S. attorney in my office. Does what we call Maine justice have that ability? That they should, and they do. But that's one place where I feel somewhat constrained, that we are calling out this national activity, if you will. But some of it, I think, does tip over into a potential criminal case. I certainly think that's true in opioids. I think it was true of Google when I brought a case against Google back in 2011 for assisting offshore pharmacies importing opioids into the United States. There's an argument there for more criminal enforcement, but for a 100-person law firm in Rhode Island that only has 30 people doing civil work, it's really hard for us to bring that kind of case without our partners.
So Jared, maybe after Peter covered that, but you came out of the Consumer Protection Division long before you were Attorney General. Well, not long before. Maybe you could address that role of consumer protection in your city, and specifically, I'm interested in addition to that, how do you all work together? I mean, you've got some attorneys general who want to overthrow presidential elections, who are under criminal investigation, doing all kinds of things. Not these 3, but you've got a bunch of them.
We don't work with them.
But somehow when it comes to Meta, everybody's in. So maybe you could address both the expansion of your own protection role and also how you did it. How did you pull this off?
Well, it's funny. I found myself kind of fangirling one of our Republican colleagues, like, oh, that nailed that point, and then being like, Charity, he is so like on the other side of the spectrum from you on like LGBTQ issues, like just there's a limit here. But the thing that I was going to say that's so incredible is, sometimes when something happens in the world and you feel helpless, and then you're like, I can't control that. But when you're Attorney General, you can. And that's what we did. Who here checks Instagram every day? I do. Who here checks Facebook every day? Okay, Facebook. R.I.P. Facebook, they're on the way out. Who checks TikTok every day? Not me, because I had to cancel it because I was so addicted, and I was just like, and the guy comes out and was like, wow, you've been on TikTok for a while, and you're like, oh my god, I have work to do. I also am a mother. So yeah, we see this problem with our kids or our nieces and our nephews, and then we get to do something about it. There's so much power in that. But here's what I want to say about the consumer space. So the Consumer Protection Act is, when we talk about consumer issues, that's like largely what we're doing. The Consumer Protection Act doesn't require intent. It doesn't require damages, misrepresented. The person who bought whatever they bought or did whatever they did in the consumer space relied on your misrepresentation, and your misrepresentation was material to their ultimate choice. That's it. It is incredibly powerful and broad. And the thing about living in a wonderful America is that the marketplace is the most important thing. That's our whole system. So we use the Consumer Protection Act all the time in spaces that you don't necessarily think relate to consumer issues. Let me give you a great example, because we got a great decision this morning and I'm so excited. We in Vermont sued the fossil fuel companies using a greenwashing theory. Our environmental laws in the Second Circuit in this space aren't currently awesome. So suing the fossil fuel companies to say, hey, thanks guys, you ruined the world, wasn't going to be as effective as saying, hey guys, you lied to us when you told us your product was greener. LOL, it is not greener. You lied. You lied to us. And we sued on that theory like 2 years ago. This is my bragging happy news for the day. 2 years ago we sued, and of course the bad guys always want to be in federal court. We want to be in state court, so they tried to get us to go to federal court. We've been duking that for 2 years, and then today we found out that this case got remanded to state court, so we can proceed on the merits of the case. I'm really pumped about that. But yeah, a greenwashing case using the Consumer Protection Act is how we got in to hold the fossil fuel companies accountable for some part of what they were doing, which was lying to consumers. So it's really, really cool, and we do things in the consumer space all the time. In fact, you might be thinking to yourself, hang on, you sued the social media companies, but I don't recall paying for TikTok. You didn't pay with money, you paid with your data. And I could talk about data privacy like all day long, so I'm going to stop because I'm sure Jim has another question for us he'd like to ask.
Well, I do. I have many questions, but this should also give you. I'm a professor here, right? Have you noticed? You start off with a question about Meta, and then pretty soon you're talking about criminal sanctions against the Sackler family who own the opioids, and then you're talking about suing fossil fuel companies. It tells two things. First of all, AGs do what they want, ignore moderators, which makes a lot of sense, especially in this case. But more important, it should reflect to you the kind of independence which is hard baked into this. Because not only has Charity sued the fossil fuel industry, she's also fighting some lumber contractors in northern Vermont who are ripping people off and cutting too much stumpage off their land, because the Office of Attorney General, just like you're helping individual consumers with small amounts of money, is also there to do the other thing. I'm giving a speech, but what did the social media CEO do this week in Congress? He got up and he apologized. And it made huge national news. And I can assure you that the faculty here in an Ivy Law School is talking about how important this was. In the real world, he didn't do anything. He didn't do anything but oppose it. It's the three people you're sitting here who are actually taking the kind of action that can result in the corporate change that says, you're really waiting for market forces to do this? Not a chance. So we read a lot in the papers about about how crooked our electoral systems are. We have an election coming up, and I am interested in all of any of the three of you are doing anything in your own states about making sure the election this year is going to be safe, and specifically, are these absurd national charges impacting the men and women who actually carry out our electoral processes? And any one of you jump in.
Well, I'd love to share a little story about the 2020 election. I was the chief of staff at the Attorney General's office, and we had a situation in which someone had voted twice. And as you just basically picture some movie you saw about Vermont, assume it's true. It's these tiny cute towns, and when you vote, you go in and they give you a marker and you fill out a circle. So this is not a fancy kind of the Russians hacked us, right? So this person went and they literally they mailed in a ballot and they went and they got the marker and they voted that way, whatever they did. And so we reached out to the person And we said, what's going on here? And he was like, I was testing the system. And I was like, well, the system works. You owe us money now. So that we actually have, I wanted to share my case of protecting elections in Vermont. You know, and we'll do that if we have to in 2024. Hopefully that guy knows the system works.
So you have one voter in the entire state.
Yes.
One voter, and he was
Yeah.
testing this.
And the town clerks, I mean, I can't express how it really is so adorable, this tiny town, this tiny state of Vermont. And they're literally like town clerks who are in charge, and you don't mess with them. My town clerk, I don't mess with her. She's in charge of everything, and it's great. But if you test the system, we're going to track it down and find you.
Peter, what do you think?
I'll just quickly add, I haven't received any calls, anyone testing the system. I think it's hilarious. And I love Vermont. My husband's from Vermont. My mother-in-law still lives in Vermont, so we talk about Vermont quite a bit. I think right now what we're seeing is, obviously our Secretary of State, Galvin, is the most senior in the country. So there's a credibility that he brings in Massachusetts and, of course, nationally. I think whether Trump should be on the ballot obviously has shown up here, at least in the context of the primary. We are involved in that, and decisions have already been made with respect to whether or not he should appear on the primary ballot, and the answer was yes. And then, of course, nationally, we're going to show up in other states on election protection, voter protection, specifically in swing states where we have colleagues who are, I think, expecting us to be able to help out. Absolutely. I think where we are we go back and forth in the office is making sure that some of that doesn't drown out or take away all of our attention from the work we're trying to do that we say constituents deeply care about. So if you did a survey, for example, maybe even in this room, but across the state of the Commonwealth, I don't know that folks would say what rises to the top is should Trump be on the ballot here in Massachusetts in the primary. It's economics issues, it's affordability, it's things are just too expensive. So we're striking that balance of yes, protect our democratic institutions, the right to vote, particularly in other states. Here too, if there's any flaws in certain municipalities, which frankly that has come up in certain municipalities, and we're at the forefront of addressing those with the Secretary of State. But then also making sure that we're being responsive to what we hear the people say they want us to care about. And the economics and affordability issue rises to the top. And there are a lot of tools, going back to the consumer protection point, that we have in our wheelhouse to address those. And one of the things we're taking on in a very emphatic way is student loan debt, which is $1 billion problem here in Massachusetts, primarily affecting single women and women of color. You're trying to close the racial wealth gap. We'll focus on helping people get rid of their student debt, particularly those in public service who just don't have a clue of all the programming that's available to them. And I'll just give you an example. We have folks emailing us saying, thank you so much. I just got a letter from the Department of Education. My debt of $101,000 has been wiped out, or $407,000. I mean, this is the type of work we're doing to put money back into the pockets of folks. So it's how do we strike that balance without being too distracted by a smaller subset, rightfully so, that are focused on certain things, but making sure that it's in fact responsive to what we're hearing on the ground from people.
First of all, I'm gratified with that. I listened to Howie Carr on the radio, and he says things are
You listen to Howie Carr?
He says things are completely out of control in Massachusetts on your watch.
You listen to Howie Carr? God bless you.
No, I like to know what's going on. Peter, how about you?
Yeah, I think, to that point, to that Howie Carr point, we had, I think, in 2020, 4 cases of people voting in 2 states. And there's a mechanism by which that is identified. The Secretary of State will give us that lead and you follow up. That we charged all 4 of those people. But I don't remember, Kate may remember, I don't believe, in fact I'm confident we did not put a press release out about those 4 cases because I knew what the reaction would be, that the system is flawed, that you can't trust elections. And to me, those 4 cases didn't show that at all. In fact, it showed that the system does catch, and it happens very rarely and we catch it. But a state senator happened to mention that good work, and some here, she at the State House, and of course the press picked up on it. And so now we have all these cases that we didn't talk about. To me, I don't know what the right phrase is, but I hear this all the time. I tweeted something about, I still use the word tweet, whatever. I'm like Bill Belichick, my face, or whatever it is. I tweeted out something about the amount of time that Rhode Island residents spend in ERs, because I think that is a sign of a failing healthcare system that we have in Rhode Island. And Massachusetts was up there too. Rhode Island was 49. I think Maryland may have been 48, and Massachusetts 47. So we're spending way too much time in ER. It's a sign of a failing system. And the responses I got on X were that, well, it's illegal. It's undocumented people. The phrase they use is illegal aliens who are filling up our emergency rooms. And that's why those of us who are residents, documented residents or citizens, can't get the health care we need. That's what really worries me, that people, like the former president, put out these dog whistle issues, and they are so easily consumed by some Americans, even in our clearly overwhelmingly blue states.
That's right.
And that's what really worries me. I mean, Kate will know because we drove up here together. I've now started listening to a biography of Stalin. Why? Because I really do look at the former president and I see the beginnings of an authoritarian era should he be elected. And I think that's unimaginable to some of us at a certain age. But the departure of leadership from truth, and I think Donald Trump is the first person to do it. Nixon did it in a way that seems almost amateurish today, whereas he was the poster child for this before Donald Trump. That detethering of truth from political leadership, I think, poses the greatest danger. This is how authoritarians rise to power. It's about the big lie, and you can go back to the 30s and see the big lie over and over and over again. And so I'm really worried about that.
I think Peter is exactly right. You take on these issues, don't put out a press release, but focus on what matters, and coupled with those concerns, which I also share, is the uptick in hate and white supremacy that we're seeing here in Massachusetts or in our New England states. We filed a complaint against NSC 131, a white supremacist group that is active and well in Massachusetts and in New Hampshire and other states too, and said, that's just one piece of what we're going to do to take on folks who are promulgating hate, and frankly, who want a Massachusetts that is only for sort of purebred white people. This is in 2023 and 2024, right? This rhetoric that we're seeing. So there's a way in which we can stand up using the tools we have, and then there's we really have to sort of work with other elected officials. Obviously, our current governor, Maura Healey, is a former AG, and as she and the administration grapple with the healthcare crisis, Stewart, we're grappling those issues with them, but also the migrant crisis, etc. I was stressing to the administration, if we don't over-communicate in this moment in time and frankly get ahead of these false narratives, we're going to be in trouble, because people are creating their own narrative. So the reason I can't get into that healthcare bed is because of those illegal aliens, or the reason I'm not getting something back from the state is because of these migrants, or the reason we have these budget shortfalls of late is because of those migrants. No, that's just not the case. And so it's really important that we over-communicate and articulate what we're seeing, even if we don't have all the solutions on day one. But to say we're in problem-solving mode to figure out how we advance healthcare, make sure folks have access to healthcare without interruption. Of course, the workers and the providers who provide it get their wages and also are able to provide their services without interruption, and at the same time address those folks who are sitting at airports in our beautiful state, because this is a state, we all say, that is about helping people and welcoming those who are different and new, and giving them everything they would need to be successful, like we did for every other generation that came here, willingly or unwillingly. And so I just wanted to couple some of that, because again, it is AGs at the forefront of some of this because of the unique tools that we have. We're probably going to have to exercise them with even greater urgency and boldness in this moment in time.
Wow. It's kind of hard to Pete, that you haven't mentioned healthcare, and that of course leads us into, and we're going to be coming to the questions from you pretty soon, so we're about giving you a heads up on that. And what we'll probably do is bundle questions. We'll have 3 or 4 questions, and then we'll bundle them so that the panel, all 3 of them, can respond as opposed to doing one off. But we can't leave in these troubled times without talking about reproductive rights and how that has impacted your offices.
I can, oh, go ahead.
No, go.
So I ran for office in 2022, thank you. I ran for office in 2022, so I was in the midst of running my campaign when the Dobbs decision came down. And I saw my opportunity, and I sprung into action and created like a plan for Vermont. And then like the next day I had a press conference like announcing the plan. The plan was, yeah, I'm a smart lady, but a lot also read the New York Times. So a lot of my plan came from like other people's good ideas. And then the legislature began to work on putting that, it's like I think I call it a safe harbor plan, and they call it the abortion shield law, which is now in place. But here's the thing about abortion, I'm bragging, I'm just gonna, the same day I was elected Attorney General of Vermont, Vermonters voted to enshrine a right to abortion in our Constitution. There's 252 towns in Vermont. 252 towns voted yes. Right? Even in the towns that voted for Donald Trump for president. That is how strong people feel about this issue. Again, I could teach a whole class on this issue. But again, AGs have a strong role. And for us, it wasn't the visionary I pulled together great ideas other people had. It's because of this. When we pass laws, if someone thinks those laws are unconstitutional and the state gets sued, it's the Attorney General who defends the state. So in our case, one of the laws passed related to crisis pregnancy centers. And the reason why we had to pass a law around crisis pregnancy centers is because they are funded by, they're a nonprofit, funded by people other than the person receiving the services. So there's an argument to be made they don't count as consumers under the Consumer Protection Act. So we amended our law in Vermont to address that issue so that no one can lie in the marketplace. That makes no sense. And then we were sued, so now I'm defending that lawsuit. So even though we passed a constitutional amendment, we passed a shield law, there are still issues that come up, still roles that we play, and that's probably right now the biggest role that we're playing currently defending that law.
Peter?
Yeah, when, well, the U.S. Attorney's calling me, that's never good. You can wait, I hired.
They're waiting outside.
Oh my God. Well, could be waiting for you, Jim. Dobbs, so my wife and I were on a plane when Dobbs came by. It came down, and we were sitting in our seats, we didn't have internet access, but my wife saw it through the seat on the laptop in front of us, and she punched me. Now, if you know my wife, you can't imagine, she's a physician, you can't imagine her causing anyone harm ever. She punched me, and I don't know if that was to inspire me to act or what, but I didn't need the punch. We in Rhode Island, we had enshrined Rhode a couple of years previous, so we were not worried about Rhode Island in that sense, at least in the near term. What was so fascinating about that was, though, that the former speaker, with whom I did not see eye to eye, although my prosecution of the previous speaker allowed him to become speaker, because Rhode Island, everything comes back. So we did not get along, notwithstanding that. He was absolutely convinced, as many Rhode Island Democrats who are really, they're purple, right, Kate? Some of them are even kind of red when it comes to choice. Really, so no need to enshrine Roe in state law, but we got that over the hump in the first year, and was grateful that we did. I think that in Bruin, Dobbs, no question, of this court, the worst decision, no question, because of its impact on more than 50% of our population directly, obviously. But Bruin, particularly in states that believe that gun safety keeps their residents safe. I know Massachusetts feels that very strongly, even more than Rhode Island. Bruin is the case that could literally turn the United States back into a place where you carry or you don't. And this ability to restrict gun ownership the ability to carry firearms in public. Those are very difficult arguments to make. We're defending high-capacity magazines. I'm sure, I don't know if you guys are, imagine you are defending some of your laws. We don't have an assault weapons ban, but if you had one, you're defending it in court. The arguments that you have to make based on history are absurd.
Absolutely.
Absolutely absurd.
You have to go back to the founding of the country in the 18th century, and it is absurd. I'll start with just Dobbs and then Bruin is a really great point. So Dobbs, everything they have said, I think we have been thinking about here in Massachusetts when I was a candidate and then developing a plan, and then also, of course, in office. There are many folks who say, oh, Massachusetts, you're fine because we have codified the right to an abortion. We have the SHIELD law. Actually, Massachusetts was the first to pass the SHIELD law, which is very aggressive and a very strong piece of legislation. So you have all that. So, you know, and the best healthcare institutions in the world. So what's your concern? And we said, well, we can't rest on our laurels because there's still a lot of work to do. So we got off the ground a new unit. That's our reproductive justice unit. We have a director who is just amazing in that unit. And driving some of the work in a more intersectional and comprehensive way. Because we talk about reproductive health care, it's not just about access to an abortion. There's a full spectrum of care that we're talking about. And sadly, right here in Massachusetts, if you're in Western Mass or certain parts of the state, good luck trying to access some of this health care. It's still very challenging and still very difficult. And also in certain parts of the state, you have community-based health centers delivering this work, sometimes by themselves, but situated right next to a CPC, a crisis pregnancy center. This is a case for a place in Attleboro, where literally they share a parking lot. And you have folks going into the CPC thinking they're getting certain services and being held and saying, oh, wait a minute, this is not what I signed up for. So we're doing everything we can to think about how we hold those CPCs accountable and go after them, which is national work. But this same unit is also looking at maternal health and maternal health disparities that exist here in Massachusetts as also a part of that reproductive health care spectrum. This same unit is also looking at gender-affirming care, which is absolutely under attack here in Massachusetts and this country. All of us are working together to support efforts around the country to keep this health care available to our residents and communities because it works. But these are all under assault, so it's how do we sort of bring all these conversations together. So really proud of this new unit. Then in the data privacy, location data, we're all in the weeds on this. And on Bruin, we do have some of the most aggressive and amazing gun statutes in the country. People look to us, including the assault weapons ban. And we're also in the State House actively working with the House and the Senate to improve those gun laws. But as we do that, you have folks, I feel like every single day, challenging the laws that exist on our books. Our government bureau, which is the bureau that doesn't get a lot of attention, Pat and I call them the nerds of the office. Pat is in that category, he's a nerd of the office.
And that's where Professor Bronico is.
Right, exactly. So this bureau is very busy in court almost every day, defending the things that we take for granted, these common sense gun reforms that were passed years ago. Because you have a group of folks in this country who are organized looking to challenge every law in every state that gets in the way of protecting folks from gun violence. So we are doing that through that bureau, but also thought it worth establishing a gun violence prevention unit, which is a new unit in the office that I'm very proud of, run by a director and deputy who think they've been there for years. They just got there. But who come with a deep background and expertise when it comes to gun reform, every town as well, and coming out of one of our DA's offices in terms of enforcement. But their job will not be just to enforce our laws, expand our gun laws, but also to look at community violence and how we invest in community-based organizations that actually are breaking cycles of violence, including in Lynn, which is on Uprise, Holyoke, Springfield, Boston, pockets of Boston as well. How do you sort of couple both of these conversations together? It's not just about enforcement. So more work there. But look out for these new units, which I'm really proud of, along with our police accountability unit and our elder justice unit. All new units under my leadership, which I'm really excited about. But now it's like, okay, we've got to do the work. So it won't be easy.
It was going to be my last question was police accountability. and what your officers are doing in all three of these areas, and then we will get to questions.
Well, I'll just go quickly. We got the police accountability unit off the ground because most of that police work was living in our civil rights division, but it's broader than that. We have a crime bureau that's active, working with law enforcement every day, even doing trainings around our gun laws, or even training around how we enforce the shield law, which people are still confused about. But the recent criminal legal reform that the State House passed post George Floyd gave the AG's office significant power to look at pattern and practice investigations where there is wrongdoing in a police department or municipality. And so we have this authority, but we said, okay, well, who's utilizing it? And there are a few folks in the Civil Rights Division in certain parts of the office, when they had some time, were taking on these matters, but we said we wanted to do it in a more comprehensive way. So this police accountability unit will do that, along with training and building greater relationships with law enforcement, because you cannot push a department to do this work well if you have no trusted relationships with them. And then we have some open investigations into some police departments, so more to come on that.
Peter?
Yeah, so when I took office, we had no civil rights division, so we established one to do hate crimes. We have a sentencing enhancement for hate crimes. And then crimes committed by police officers that weren't financial crimes, and there are a lot of those, more than you think. Sort of assaultive behavior, that's a misdemeanor most of the time. In Rhode Island, unless there's serious bodily injury, which is serious injury, it's a misdemeanor, and we don't do misdemeanors as prosecutors. Those are done by city and town solicitors. So what we did is we took that in and we decided we were going to do those cases because all of that authority is delegated to them. So we took on those misdemeanor cases. And I will tell you, those cases are incredibly challenging. Incredibly challenging. We have a de novo. They're misdemeanors, but they tried in the first instance in the district court before a judge. You don't have a right to a jury. If you're convicted, you can appeal, get a jury trial. So there are always two trials if you get a conviction. And we've gotten convictions, but they're always appealed, and they then become jury trials. And because we're the DA, the relationship with law enforcement becomes very difficult. And we are politicians too, and when you're running for re-election, you want that police endorsement from the FOP and the IBPO. And dealing with police chiefs is not the same thing as dealing with the IBPO and the FOP. And so I remember going into the convention of the FOP, the statewide FOP, and I did not get the endorsement from them. My opponent didn't get it, but I did not get it either. And there's no question that that was because of two things. Our work on gun safety legislation, because a lot of police officers enjoy their firearms. And number two, most importantly, because of the cases we have brought against police officers. Work worth doing, but it comes at a cost, and you have to be able to, you have to make sure that the cases you're bringing are credible. Same thing with hate crime cases, that they have to be credible. Just like every case that you bring, but particularly in that instance, you have to be able to explain to the public why you brought a case, and equally important, why you didn't. There have been some cases where we didn't bring charges. And I will tell you, the use of the grand jury there is a huge impediment to public trust. Because anything you take in front of that grand jury, and it comes out no true bill against that police officer, you can't tell the public why. Because everything that happened is a secret. And so I have tried to avoid using the grand jury wherever I can. So even if it's my call, and if you think that the public says, well, the grand jury did it, don't blame the Attorney General or the DA. No. They're blaming the AG and they're blaming the DA. So you better be able to explain it. Because getting up there and saying, well, the grand jury didn't indict, well, they can you can indict a ham sandwich, you must have tubed it. That is one of the most difficult issues we've grappled with since I began.
Very, very helpful. Charity, and then we'll... Good, we're on time. It's good.
Our
Charity, tell us
system
about
in
policing
Vermont,
accountability.
we have independently elected state's attorneys. There's 14 counties in Vermont, and everyone has a state's attorney that's independently elected. Even the teensy tiny counties that have like as many people who are enrolled in this college probably or living in that whole county. And then when we have a police use of force, or officer involved shooting, there's a review done by that county state's attorney and then by my office. And that's really, other than testifying the legislature and supporting the legislature in their work to make reforms to the law, that's really the space that we're occupying when we're talking about police accountability. We do charge police when they have committed a crime that doesn't meet the standard for police use of force. I had to do that pretty early on in my tenure. I definitely received emails calling me a police-hating whore and a police-hating bitch. Although the law was very clear to me and remains very clear to me. So it is not, as Peter articulated, fun work all the time, but it's really necessary. And it's necessary, I think a lot of, at least in Vermont, I think a lot of police are sympathetic and believe in the importance of police accountability because, that's the way it should be, and it brings down the whole profession if people, as it would for our profession, in your soon-to-be profession, if there wasn't accountability and people weren't following the rules of professional ethic, etc. So it is kind of integral to our criminal work. Almost all of our cases are murders, sexual assault, child sexual assault and sexual abuse material, formerly known as child pornography, and officer abuse of force cases. That's the bulk of what we do. So it's important.
Wow. Chairman, can I just add this? Sure. What I found is that when you sit and talk to police labor and explain why you did what you did, they'll get it.
Yeah.
And same thing with the public. When you don't charge, they'll get it. But the explanation is the most important thing. And it takes time to do it. I did one myself in a really significant case where the public was absolutely convinced the Providence Police Department had run a young man off the road and put him in a coma. That's just not what had happened, and we had the forensic evidence to establish it. But I think I did a 30, 40 slide PowerPoint. It took me an hour to go through both the legal standard, what the facts were. And if I had just come out and said, no true bill, the city would have been on fire. This is right in the middle of George Floyd's murder. And this ability to explain is really critically important.
Wow. So let's how about a show of hands here? Who'd like to have some questions, please? All over the place, in back in the middle. And we're gonna have 3 or 4 questions, and then we can loop them. We'll get more students involved in that way. Please.
First of all, thank you so much. What I'm wondering is that in a case like Meta, what are the biggest advantages of coordinating strategy between state AGs, and do differences in state law present challenges in planning and executing a coordinated strategy?
Terrific question. Who's next? Yes, sir.
I can just speak here. I had a question about how all of you handled going from doing the work to running a successful campaign. Like, what kind of resources did you rely on? Who did you rely on the most? And what's something you wish you knew before you started the campaign?
Next. Yes, sir.
Thank you. I appreciated all of your time. Very excellent insights. And it was very inspiring to hear about the power that you have when you can set the agenda and the Attorney General makes the first move. But I wanted to ask about the role that you play when you are responding, specifically when you might be representing the state, to Attorney General Carter's point, as respondents. Take a case like Health in Montana, which is about young people suing for unconstitutional exclusion of health and their safety in approving an oil pipeline. What do you think the Attorney General's role is, and what has it been when you have to take on a case and represent your state that you may empathize with the plaintiff for, or what kind of levers do you have to express?
Okay, let's have one more, and then we'll go to the generals.
Trevor.
How about the back over here, right behind you?
Thank you all for your perspectives and your insights. It's incredibly valuable, and thank you for your time. But as many of you have formerly served in public office before your time as State Attorney General, how has your direct involvement with community members as representatives of your own communities really informed your perspective going into the office of the State Attorney General?
Well, these are all tremendous questions, so why don't each of you kind of select one of them in the response so we can even get to more. So which one do you want to jump on?
As we walk out, she can choose my damn question.
So you can jump on.
Maybe I'll choose like 2. I'll go quick. I'll just start with the most recent question. I shared obviously a piece of my narrative, and I think we have I've made it clear to the team that we're going to focus on criminal legal reform, particularly what's happening in our prisons, our houses of correction. And there is a lot of leverage we have as an agency that at times defends the Department of Correction, which is one of our state agencies. Sometimes they are right on the law, but on the policy, we may think, oh, they can change that. So I think it sort of answers both your questions. We currently have a working group we established internally across every division in the office to actually develop an agenda of what we're going to do under the criminal legal reform space, particularly around medical parole, access to healthcare in these institutions, also the economics of what happens in our prisons, the fines and the fees that prisoners are exactly. To tell them, actually talk about a legislative victory. One of the things on the list was free phone calls for folks who are in our houses of correction and Department of Correction. And we actually, as an office, took a position that it should be free for both. We were the only, I think, elected office to do that. We pushed both, and that got done recently, so it's a victory.
Congratulations.
But in representing sometimes the Department of Correction or DCF, some of our agencies, there are some fact patterns that are very painful. So we think, okay, we have to defend them based on what the law is, but if there's some policy changes we need to make to ensure those outcomes don't happen again, we're going to do that part too.
As opposed to an outside counsel who, when they defend the government, they have an economic interest to drag their feet and to just take the hard line and defer to a client agency that maybe should be spanked a little bit by the AG. But
yes.
I'm a believer in government lawyers doing these cases. Yes, Peter and Terry.
Yeah, a couple things. To your question, the thing that stayed with me the most, that stays with me even today, is when I was running in probably 2017, maybe 2018, that cycle at least. I was at at public housing community talk, and afterwards, someone came up to me. Actually, I don't think she even came up to me. I think we just kind of walked out together, and I asked her, "How long have you been living here?" And she said, "Well, about a year." I said, "Well, what caused you to come live here in the last year?" And she said, "Well, I lost my pension. I was a nurse at St. Joseph's Hospital." And St. Joseph's Hospital, when it went through the regulatory process, to make a long story short, the pension system was spun off, so only the retirees were in it, and $14 million was put in it, and that was it. There was nobody contributing to it. And it can't survive that way. And so it was a bad decision, frankly, by my office and by the Department of Health. I took that moment with me then and now that I am not going to be a healthcare regulator pushover. You have to stand up for your people because in most instances, nobody else is going to do it. And that includes other state agencies. I have had my issues. I have been on the other side of cases of state agencies because I don't believe they're doing the right thing. And I think that is the beauty of being independent. When the governor tried to evict homeless people from the front steps of the state capitol in the pouring rain with eviction notices, and then, not surprisingly, got sued, I told him I wasn't going to represent him. That if he was going to be that stupid, frankly, and do it without consulting me, then he could get his own lawyer, which is what he did. And so I think that independence is something you have to embrace and not be afraid of. And you just have to be ready to stand up for the people of your state, because there are going to be many, many instances where nobody else will, and that includes state agencies. When we sold our public utility, or our public utility was sold, National Grid sold our public utility, our own Division of Public Utilities and Carriers, in my view, sold out Rhode Islanders on climate change and in terms of money. And when we went to court to change that, and we did, that Division of Public Utilities and Carriers actually filed a brief against me for doing my job. And when I was in front of the House, Senate, and the House and Senate Finance Committees last year, I brought that brief with me because I wanted the people of Rhode Island to see what one of their own agencies was doing against their interests. That is the work that gets you up in the morning, that gets our lawyers up in the morning, because they know that when they come to work every day, they're going to be fighting. And that person fighting that fight wasn't Peter Neronha, it was Nicholas Vaz. And nobody in this room, I guarantee you, knows who Nicholas Vaz is. But he saved the people of Rhode Island $200 million in that transaction and fought back on climate. That's the work that matters. That's why I decided to be an AG, an assistant U.S. attorney, and when the opportunity came to be U.S. attorney. Being a Goodwood proctor for 7 years taught me a lot, but I had no fun.
Sure. I was in a big law firm for 6 years and I too had no fun. And now I had no fun. I was in New York. I'm gonna answer the question about campaigns. Because as you gathered, I spent a lot of time working in the Attorney General's office. And I spent 4.5 years before I came to law school working in the governor's office. But I'd never been a candidate, less than true. I do serve on my library board. I have 30 signatures to get on the ballot. But so my predecessor was my boss, the Attorney General. I was his chief of staff. And he was kind of struggling whether he was gonna run or not, and it was a big decision, because as you can see, it's like the best job ever. And he ultimately decided that he wasn't gonna run again, except he decided on May 5th. The signatures to get on the ballot, new 500, are due May 25th. The primary is August 9th. In Vermont, that's the whole election in many races, unless you have someone great. There's hardly any Republicans left in Vermont, so we have literally more women in the legislature than we do Republicans. So I had 3 months to tell Vermont who I was, convince them to vote for me, and I was running against a state's attorney who'd been a politician had already been elected. So that question, that's why I'm answering this question, and it was 2022 where we had like the Great Resignation, and almost every seat was an open seat. There was competitive primaries all over the place. It was truly insane, right, Amelia? My outreach coordinator is nodding. It was nuts, and I therefore could not find a campaign manager. So I had to be my own campaign manager for the first like basically month of my campaign. And when I talk about like filing the 500 signatures, it was me driving in my car, listening to the joke and crying like, because I'm the first woman elected Attorney General in Vermont. So that was very motivating to me. So I filed my 500 signatures on May 25th, and I get on the ballot, and now like, what am I gonna do? Well, one thing that I had done, anticipating that I wanted to one day run for the best job ever, I did the Emerge program, which Massachusetts has an Emerge program, and if you ever are a woman or non-binary person considering running, I highly recommend it. It's a Democratic campaign school for women. I had done that and I learned a lot, but it also created an immediate network of women and other people, there's Men for Emerge as well, who supported women running for office. And the idea that we had never had a woman Attorney General was very motivating to people, and I got a lot of support. But the ultimate answer, this is a very long way of saying, the ultimate answer is on how to win an election is you have to get more votes than the other person. And so one day in my pajamas, I got on my laptop and I did some math. And I figured out where am I gonna find the votes? And I looked at where the Democrats voted, and then I went there in my sneakers and I passed out leaflets with my friends and my family. And anyway,
And your law school classmates.
and my law school classmates who flew out, and I did beat my primary opponent by 30 percentage points. So, and there's no polling, so I had no idea when that happened. So I could write a whole essay about my crazy wildest summer of my life in 2022.
So let's both take back over.
I have to add
Oh,
this,
please.
and I'm sorry about the meta question, but the team is here if you want to answer the meta question, we didn't hear the issue. But on this point of election, because I think it really is important, as we look to make sure the electorate in this country reflects the communities we serve. It does take a lot. I did the Emerge program as well in Massachusetts, and I speak to the value of that and the network and everything else. But there are folks in this room who are interested in running for office. Give it serious consideration. We need more folks with different stories, different backgrounds, and particularly folks who are in all the right reasons, who are passionate, as Peter described, who will be bold, to operate with a sense of fearlessness to go after not only the position, but most importantly the job to help people. I'm the first Black woman to serve in this role. We're doing statewide in the progressive state of Massachusetts, all of Massachusetts. So clearly it tells me as much as I'm like, yay, we still have a lot of work to do from the local level all the way to the statewide level. But it's conversations like this, it's meeting people, it's staying connected with your peers. And frankly, if you're interested, going for it. Many of my family members said, why do you want to do that? Are you new to making money? What? I get God given purpose, all right, whatever, but like, what? So I just, sometimes it's you by yourself, sitting in a room, but saying, I'm doing this for all the right reasons, inspired by your personal story, an experience you had, working in an office and wanting to sort of be the leader at the table. And then lastly, I would just add, because it's still very challenging for women to run and win, is money and volunteers. You need money and you need volunteers. It's really that simple to win. You need folks to go with you, to knock on doors, to spread the word, and you need folks to invest in your leadership, not just the campaign, in your leadership. That's still very difficult for women across this country to do. You have to prove more that you know that we're gonna be just as great and passionate as Peter. We're gonna work great with Peter, right? And if you're a woman of color, it's even more challenging because of the bias and the stereotypes about what a leader looks like and what a leader ultimately is. And so to the extent you're interested in getting involved, not just in the work, but I would urge you to also get involved in campaigns. To really spend time getting to know us as candidates, getting involved in campaigns where you see someone who is doing something even in your community about effectuating change. You can learn a lot there, and actually, I think what you learn there is just as important as what we're learning in the office, because hopefully you take what you learn on the ground and you bring it to the office and you frankly kick ass in helping to respond to the very things you heard. So just thank you for that question, but hopefully we get more people running for office.
So on that note, hold your applause for 1 second. I want to say, don't you love them? Don't you all want to work for the office of the Attorney General? Pat Moore, I want to come back, I think. I want to also.
Well, have you?
Done. I also want to say thank you before I officially thank the three of you and you, Jim. I want to say thank you to Pat Moore, First Assistant Attorney General, to Amelia Vath. Pat is from here, First Assistant for Andrea.
My BC connection.
Yeah. Pat Wendier, I want to say thank you to Amelia Vath, who I think is sitting right here. Amelia is from Vermont, and to Kate Sabatini, a BC law grad who works at Charity Clark's for the AG in Vermont, and say thank you for helping us make today happen and for making so much of what happens. And thank you to the four of you for being not only powerful, smart, compassionate, but being so generous in spirit for coming here. And